welcome back to the Hall of Fame. My name is Penelope Sanyu, and I am excited to be sitting with a very wonderful human who you're about to be introduced to. I am glad that you're joining us on the Hall of Fame, and I would love for you to introduce yourself to our people, because if I do, I will not do it justice. So who am I sitting with today?
So my name is Irũngũ Houghton. Functionally, I am the Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya. Mm-hmm. I'm a father, husband, and a grandfather, and feminist. Mm-hmm.
See, I almost choked on my juice.
I saw that.
Because very few men define themselves as feminist. Why is it important for you to claim that title? Yeah.
No, I think anybody who believes in justice, who believes in equality, has to be a feminist, and that's obviously the case. And my feminism allows for freedom from any form of identity-based discrimination. So it doesn't matter whether it's age, disability, class, ethnicity, and so on. Yeah. All of that, I think, is part of humanity and part of the struggle as us as human beings, to make sure that everybody is safe, everybody is dignified, and everybody has an equal opportunity. So it's very easy for me to be a feminist. But if I think back to kind of my younger days, I wasn't always a feminist. In fact, I often describe my dating behavior between the ages of 14 and 18 as a serial monogamist. I was a serial assassin, and I would have these relationships that were probably not as dramatic as many of the ones we worry about now. But I did do the thing that I discovered much later is called ghosting. So I would be in a relationship with you.
The people.
Yeah, I'd be in a relationship with you, and then after the relationship was gone, I just go, right? And it was even more dramatic because those days we didn't have smartphones, right? Yeah. So it was a relationship I had when I was about 19 with a feminist, a South African feminist, who basically just broke that to bits, broke it down for me, and how devastating it was, and how negative it was, and unnecessary. But I realized that actually my upbringing as a young man had not prepared me for conversations where I would say, listen, relationship has been great, but unfortunately I'm either not feeling it anymore, or I want to move on. I just didn't have the courage to have that conversation, so I would just disappear.
So, speaking of ghosting, now that you've introduced ghosting, I know that it's very toxic behavior, and there's been talk lately about toxic masculinity and positive masculinities, and what that means and how it comes about, and who has it and who doesn't. How do you identify it? So, what is your understanding of masculinity, and how can you tell you're being a toxic masculine? Or what does it look like? What does it wear? How does it smell? Things like that.
So the term toxic masculinity, I was really only present to it in 2019 as a concept, right? Yeah. So as somebody who had been very early on involved in kind of gender-based violence work, in the days when I was involved as a university in Dar es Salaam, and Levina Mikasa, it's crazy how, 35 years later, I can remember this woman's name, because it was such a traumatic experience. She was a university student, and she was body shamed by an underground society called Punch. I studied at the University of Dar es Salaam, and there was a society called Punch that basically used to essentially just threaten women who I think now were probably just financially independent, sexually independent, and confident. Yeah. But they used to really abuse them they've got these murals that they used to put up.
Oh my goodness, at a university.
At a university, it was crazy. And they would just do these murals, and they would put in names, and they would put in incidences.
Oh no.
And poor Levina was targeted, allegedly because she had a relationship with an older man that would come to pick her up. Mm-hmm. And she essentially committed suicide by jumping off a 7-story building in her dorm, because she just couldn't cope with the trauma.
Yeah,
and I was
just
so horrified by this, So that was kind of my first entry point into that.
Yeah.
But funny enough, it wasn't something. So I realized I had an opportunity. I had a responsibility and an opportunity to change the way that I behaved at a personal level. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't really in the 90s and 20s very clear that actually the work that needed to take place was changing this understanding of men of themselves, right? So we saw it as a racial relationship issue. We saw it as a thing that needed to be deconstructed on the basis of society, and that we are all really the product of history and traditions and behavior that we've learned in our homes and so on. But it was really until 2019 I began to look at this a bit more closely, and why it occurred to me as being important was because I started to see a lot of young men almost exploding with violence because of rejection. And it began to give me this thought about why is it that men have such fragile egos, right? And again, it's through the lens of violence. So I think coming back to the issue of masculinity and positive masculinity, I think positive masculinity for me has always been, I guess the values that can guide a man or a boy around being a safe companion, a friend to somebody without the expectation or the entitlement over a woman's body or a girl's body. So that's the first thing. No sense that you have control over another person, particularly one that you say that you are attracted to, right? Why does the attraction lead to domination? And I think for me, that's the first thing, companionship. The second one is fathers that take the responsibility over their children and their relationship with their spouses, but do not dominate them in order to do that. I grew up in a home. My father, was with us until I was a father myself, and I learned a lot from my father. My father, for example, in our home, we never had father's chair.
That designated. You cannot sit in the head of the household chair.
Even if the father is not there, you can't sit in that chair.
Exactly, it holds power.
And if you do, as soon as he walks in, you have to move. Right?
Quickly,
but I also had it that the kitchen was not out of bounds for me as a young boy, right? And I know there are certain households where if the boy goes to go and wash dishes, or if the boy
weakness,
it's like, what are you doing?
Abomination.
So that's that's the other thing. Being a responsible father without having to be a domineering father. And then I think as a manager, which is of course now the space that I'm in, or as an activist manager, I realized that actually part of my responsibility is to create a space in which there is complete safety in the office, and to be open to the idea that. We won't always get it right, and that there will be moments where people will overstretch, they will offend others, but create a space for people to be able to discuss that and course correct. So this is for me, these three elements of responsible fatherhood, a warm and non-domineering companionship for me is the masculinity.
So I love so much about everything you have said, and I have so many follow-up questions which this short space that we're having cannot even allow me to ask, because there's a conversation around power, there's a conversation around vulnerabilities, there's a conversation around mentorship, because that's what's happening a lot today, and even how we're doing it. So I know that I interact with so many people, and you can tell so much about someone's character by how they present themselves. I hear so much vulnerability in your voice, in your person, in your character, in your story, and I just want to ask, as a father, because your father modeled fatherhood for you. Now you're fathering not just your children, but even children in the community, boys in the spaces that you work and lead in many spaces. You're a father. What key things would you tell young boys, young men out there who are struggling with manhood, struggling with how they see themselves and how they present themselves and how they seek to take power and be domineering over other people? So because there are those struggles today, what would you say to them?
So human beings often operate within these kind of 3 Fs, right? So it's like fight, flight, or fight,
flight, and there's an F. I know that.
Let's stick with the 2 for the moment. I often argue that actually the more powerful response that a human being had is to frame, right? So if you are in a space where things are happening, you've got a context that's going on, and it could be a very private context in your home, or it could be in a nightclub, or it could be in a workspace, or in a church, or anywhere like that. You always have the opportunity to frame how you want conversations to take place, right? And that framing is free of any experience that you had as a child, right? So I'm very blessed to have had a father who was very open. He was open in many ways. Let me just explain a couple of things. For example, my father was a white man. He was Anglo-Saxon, British. He came out to Kenya when he was 23. He married my mother, and they brought up this biracial household. And when I turned 14, he came into the room and threw a number of books at me, and they were books by James Baldwin, a gay African-American activist, civil rights activist. There was the Martin Luther King books. There was Soledad Brother and Malcolm X and Maya Angelou. And he just gave me the books.
Everything.
And he said to me, I am your father, but I cannot prepare you to deal with racism.
Yeah.
Right? You have to find your path. So here are a few people who I think did a very good job of framing. And I started reading them at the age of 14. So by the time I turned 18, I had gone through most of the civil rights literature and the national independence literature in terms of Africa. But he also introduced me to Nina Simone, for example.
Yeah.
Right? So the beauty of the music, the beauty of, kind of poetry and so on. And I often say that was great parenting, because he didn't try to foist an Anglo-Saxon white father who cared for his son's perspective on his son. He said to his son, these are the tools, these are the resources that I know are available. Please find your way. Right? And he said to me, and I will protect you. Right? So at the age of 15, I got arrested. I was a student in London at the time, and I got arrested with an Irish friend who was half my size. And we were divided and separated across the road. And when we came back together again, I discovered that the white police, had only asked him questions about me.
Oh.
They didn't take his name, they didn't ask him why he was on the streets.
Oh.
Everything was about me, including things like what's under his hat, what is in his boots, because they thought because I was black, marijuana or banking.
Of course, you're carrying something suspicious behavior.
My father was furious. And he picked me, I told him the story, he picked me, went to the police station, and I had to listen to my dad speak for 20 minutes about racism, which is fascinating. But again, the point is that whatever we inherit in terms of culture, traits, tradition, is never as important and is never as powerful as the paths that we chart ourselves. Right?
Yeah.
So we always have choices, and one of the difficulties I think for men and women is that we are constantly bumping up against very restrictive gendered stereotypes of who we should be, how we should dress, who we should relate to, and what's right and wrong. And the world is actually, in some ways that's a kind of a lighter form of insanity.
It is.
Because if you think about it, every tradition at some point was created, right? So if it was created once, it can be recreated, right? Yes. So I think what's more interesting for all of us, whatever age we are, whatever gender we come from, whatever sexuality we profess, to just declare that actually we are framing who we are in that space. And if I want to play netball, it doesn't mean that I'm suddenly more feminine than the women who play netball, the men who don't. If women want to wear trousers all the time, fine, right? I think it also kind of goes into the spaces around the people that we choose to love.
Yes.
So the other thing I should say as a feminist, I really don't think governments should be in our bedrooms, right? As long as there is age of consent, there is no violence, it's consensual. Apart from that, our bedrooms are too small for an entire government.
Any whole and free government to be in.
So you get the point. So I think that's one of the things, is actually for young men and for boys, young men and men, elder men, it's really for them to frame who they are authentically, rather than just take up all these bags that we've got through history,
Someone I love usually says, Penny, if you did it, you can undo it. And so I love that you say we can frame. I want to ask one last question, because in framing, you can't frame if you don't understand your identity. If you're struggling with identity, it's difficult to frame, because everybody and everything is framing for you, right? You're just falling for the trap of everything that's choosing for you what you should be and how you should be. So my last question for you would be, how do you undo all these things that have been planted on the inside of us, both by the politics we are surrounded by present and absentee fathers that are raising us, by all the things that we are in a society with today.
Right.
As a person at my big age, how do I unlearn these things that have shaped who I am and have now become my identity?
So maybe two or three things. One is that we don't have an identity, we have multiple identities. And those identities have power and privilege in specific contexts, right? So if I walk into a conference like the East African Philanthropy Conference, having done 30 years of, human rights, social justice
rights work,
there's a certain voice that I can command in that space. But when I go into another space, I have to keep quiet and listen, because I actually have nothing but reactions to offer, right? So I think, first of all, just acknowledging that context matters, and our identities matter in different spaces. The third thing, I think, for me is really being very wary of the binaries, because I think that's one of the things that mentally destroys all societies. This idea that there is good and bad, and nothing in between. There is black people and white people, nothing in between. If you think about it, so everything that we take as binaries, there's only two genders, right? That's another, binary cul-de-sac, right? So I think that's the third thing. I think the fourth one is that we have to check our privilege in all the spaces that we're in, right? And that may be uncomfortable, because with privilege comes power. It comes visibility, and an opportunity to occupy a space, right? So thinking about kind of which are the spaces that we want to be listening in, and which are the ones we want to intervene decisively, and ultimately which are the spaces that we want to build collective thinking, right? And sometimes, keeping your own thoughts to yourself is actually the best way of getting a collective to start working through problems. As we often say, questions have more power than answers most of the time, right? So I think these would be the things that I would offer folks. And really this idea that life is not static. Whatever you're experiencing right now, whatever
somebody else is
first of all, somebody else has gone through it,
or right? will go through it, or is going through
and
it.
And you will not always be in this space, right? And I think that's part of the kind of self-care that we need to bring to this work, which is to understand that actually we are not going to be in this inquiry, this particular inquiry, for all our lives, right? So enjoy it, be curious about it, play with it, but at all times find that voice within you that leaves you fully expressed and authentic, rather than just wanting to go on with what everybody else is saying.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time and your wisdom. I know that we've had so many nice things, and we want to take some of them and start putting them into practice. If you're out there struggling with your masculinity, he's a person you can talk to, or find your person, find someone that you can confide in, be vulnerable, frame spaces for yourself, and find choice in the things you do. Don't ghost young women and girls out there. Important. Until next time, it's been Penny and Irunga. We wish you the best. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Lovely.
Thank you so much.